My name is Olivia Grant. I'm 29, a creative consultant living in Portland, Oregon. I've worked hard for every inch of the life I have put myself through college, built my own business, and stood on my own 2 feet since I was 17. And yet, despite all of that, within the walls of my own family, I've never felt smaller. Ever since my mother married Frank, I've become something of an accessory acknowledged when convenient, dismissed when it counts. I've grown used to the side eyes, the exclusion from group texts, the fact that I always hear about family news secondhand. But nothing prepared me for tonight. Only important people sit with the adults, Frank said, not even trying to lower his voice, as the server politely gestured toward the table lined with booster seats and plastic cups. His words hung in the air like smoke, bitter and impossible to ignore. I blinked, confused, waiting for someone to correct him. But no one did. The server looked from me to Frank, uncertain. "Ma'am, is this not your?" Frank cut him off. "She's fine. That's where we've set her. I mean, she's still figuring life out, right?" He gave a dry chuckle. "Marketing or something artsy, isn't it? Not quite what I'd call real work." The guests at the adult table, mostly distant relatives and Frank's business friends, laughed awkwardly. I didn't look at them. My eyes locked on my mother. She was seated at the center of the main table, radiant in a sky-blue silk dress that made her look every bit the queen of the evening. Our eyes met. For a second, something flickered recognition, maybe guilt, but she quickly turned away, picking up her champagne flute as if she hadn't seen anything at all. I stood frozen. The noise around me became muffled, like I'd been pushed underwater. I felt hot and cold at the same time. The server shifted. Is this not okay?" "It's perfect," Frank said for me, clapping the man's back. My hands tightened around the strap of my purse. But I smiled anyway. I've learned to smile through worse. I walked toward the kids' table, the click of my heels sharp and awkward against the polished hardwood floor. It felt like everyone was watching. My place card was nestled between a 6-year-old boy who was stacking croutons and a girl in a glittery dress coloring a dinosaur menu. "Hi," the girl said sweetly. "You're too big for this table." I managed a laugh. "Yeah, I get that a lot." I slid into the tiny chair and adjusted myself, knees awkwardly angled, heart pounding. Frank's voice rang out behind me again, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know, maybe she just likes the kids' table. Less pressure, right? No big conversations, no big expectations." Another wave of laughter rippled through the adult table. One of the guests chuckled. "At least the food's better." Frank snorted. "That's true. Chicken nuggets are probably more her speed anyway." My face burned. I felt like a child again, not the loved kind, but the invisible kind. The kind who learns to shrink to stay out of trouble. I reached for the water glass, fingers trembling. As I took a sip, my gaze drifted back to the head table. My mother laughed politely at something one of Frank's friends said, careful not to look my way again. She'd seen me. She knew where I was sitting. And she was choosing to pretend she didn't. A memory surfaced me at 9, home from school with a fever. My mom, sitting beside me with a cold cloth and reading Anne of Green Gables in her soft voice. That woman felt like another life. One of the kids at the table nudged my arm. "You want my dinosaur sticker?" I smiled faintly. "Thanks, but you keep it. It suits you more." Across the room, the server poured more wine at the adult table. Frank leaned back in his chair, lounging like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. He'd paid for the dinner, the decorations, probably even my mother's dress. And I was just furniture. "Olivia?" I turned, startled. Noah. I hadn't seen him in years. We'd gone to high school together. He was a bartender now, dressed in black with a subtle name tag. His smile hadn't changed. He held out a folded napkin. "I think this is yours." I took it, confused, but nodded. "Thanks." Oof. When he walked away, I opened it under the table. "You deserve better than this." 4 words. Scribbled in a familiar, looping script. I blinked twice before folding it slowly and slipping it into my clutch. Somewhere behind me, Frank raised his voice again. What do you think, Liv? Want to say a few words about our guest of honor? I didn't look back. I just breathed. My dad once told me, when someone tries to make you feel small, remember it says more about their limits than yours. I stayed put. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. But I met Frank's eyes the next time they swept the room. He looked away first. When the party began to wind down and guests stood to collect gift bags and offer air kisses, my mother finally approached. She looked tense, her smile paper-thin. I hope the food was okay, she said, adjusting the bracelet Frank had bought her last Christmas. It was fine, I replied. Not quite what I expected. Her eyes flickered with something shame, maybe. Or just discomfort. Frank thought it would make things easier. I nodded. It did. Drive safe, she said, not meeting my eyes. I walked to my car alone, heels clicking in time with the fading music behind me. The napkin was still in my hand when I sat behind the wheel, crumpled softly between my fingers like a promise I hadn't made yet, but one I knew I would. The drive home from the restaurant was quiet, too quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just let the city blur past in streaks of orange and red lights, the napkin still clutched in my hand like it might disappear if I let go. You deserve better than this. 4 words written by someone who barely knew my life now, but somehow knew exactly what I needed to hear. I parked outside my apartment complex and sat in the car for a few minutes, watching my breath fog the windshield. I couldn't shake the weight in my chest, a heaviness I didn't know how to name. Humiliation, sir. Anger, yes. But more than that, it was grief. Not just for how the evening went, but for everything that had built up to it. The little dismissals, the subtle exclusions, the way my mother looked right through me tonight, as if standing up for me might cost her too much. When I finally stepped into my apartment, Scout Me scruffy little terrier mix-bounded toward me, tail wagging wildly. I knelt to hug him, burying my face into his fur longer than necessary. He licked my cheek, whining softly like he could feel the sadness wrapped around me. You'd never sit me at the kids' table, huh? I whispered. I made tea, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop. No emails, no texts, not even from my mother. I thought about calling her, asking why, demanding something. But what could she possibly say that would make any of it better? That she didn't notice? That Frank overstepped? That it wasn't personal? It was personal. I pulled out the napkin from my purse, smoothing it out on the coffee table. Noah's handwriting was still clear, a little shaky like he'd scribbled it quickly. I hadn't seen him since we were 20, maybe 21, working summer jobs before college stole us in different directions. He'd been quiet but kind, never one to mock or judge. The kind of person who watched the room and saw what others missed. I remembered prom night, when I'd been stood up. He'd offered to drive me home, even though we barely knew each other. Said, no one should go home alone when they came expecting to dance. That night, I'd thought maybe he was special. Then life moved on, like it always does. Now here he was again, slipping me a reminder in the form of paper and ink that I still mattered, at least to someone. I set my tea down, opened my phone, and typed his name into Instagram. There he was, Noah Marshall. Still in Portland. Still looked like he belonged in a small indie movie, all soft flannel and warm smiles. I didn't message him. Not yet, but I smiled. The next morning, I woke to a text from Aunt Carol, me, mother's older sister, the only relative who ever truly tried to stay close. Carol. Hey sweetheart. I saw what happened last night. I wanted to say I'm sorry, that wasn't right. I stared at the screen, emotions rushing to the surface again. Me, thanks. I appreciate that. Carol. Your mom looked uncomfortable, but... She didn't stop him. May? No, she didn't. There was a long pause before her next message came. Carol. She's not as strong as you, Olivia. I wish she were. But she's not. Strong. That word landed strangely in my chest. I didn't feel strong last night. I felt small. Forgotten. But I didn't cry, I didn't run. I sat at that table, made eye contact with the man who tried to humiliate me, and stayed. Maybe that counted for something. I spent the afternoon working. My clients didn't care that my mother had chosen politeness over protection. They wanted clean brand audits, sharper copy, campaign calendars that worked. And honestly, the distraction helped. Around 4, a knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it cautiously. It was Noah. He stood there holding a to-go cup and a small white paper bag. Didn't know if you drank coffee, so I went with peppermint tea. And there's a lemon scone in here. Felt like you could use one. I blinked, surprised. How did you? Carol told me where you live, he said with a sheepish grin. She called the bar this morning, said you might need a friend. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Do you want to come in? If you're okay with that. I stepped aside, and he entered. Scout immediately trotted over, tail wagging in approval. I remember him, Noah said, crouching to give Scout a scratch behind the ears. He was the mascot of your apartment sophomore year, right? You have a scary memory. He stood and handed me the tea. I just remember what matters. We sat down on the couch, and for a few minutes, it was quiet again. But not heavy this time. Frank's always been like that? He finally asked. Worse. Last night just made it public. He nodded, not pressing. I saw your face when he said that thing about chicken nuggets. I thought I could handle it, but it hit harder than I expected. Dough. Because it's not just about where you sat, he said gently. It's about where they think you belong. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded version of the same napkin he'd given me. I kept one for myself, he said with a small smile. So I'd remember that I said something when it counted. I laughed through the lump in my throat. Thank you, I said. Really? He stood to leave. You don't owe anyone silence, Olivia. Not even your mother. If you're watching this part, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family members who didn't value you. After he left, I sat holding the warm cup of tea, watching the last of the daylight fade through my window. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not by the people I had always tried to belong to, but by someone who simply chose to notice. The next day, I woke to a photo notification from my mom's Facebook. I hesitated before tapping it, already sensing the sting behind the screen. There it was, the group photo from the birthday dinner. My mother front and center, glowing in her blue dress. Frank beside her, hand possessively at her waist. Surrounding them were my half-siblings, their spouses, a few family friends, all smiles, all perfectly positioned. I wasn't in the picture. I hadn't even been asked. The caption read, "So grateful for everyone who made my night so special. Number family first." I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. It was like someone had drawn a bold black line around what she considered family, and I'd landed outside of it. I set the phone down, walked to the kitchen, and made coffee without tasting it. Scout followed me around, sensing the tension. I crouched beside him, pressing my forehead to his. She doesn't see me, boy. Not really. Oh. The knock on the door came an hour later. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, my mother stood on the threshold. She looked nervous, holding a pink bakery box and a forced smile. "I brought those lemon squares you like." I stepped aside without a word, letting her in. The silence between us was thick, like walking through fog. She placed the box on the table, glanced around the apartment like she didn't remember how small it was. She used to visit often back when Frank was still a name and not a presence. Back when she used to bring wine and ask about my latest projects. "You have a nice place," she said, as though seeing it for the first time. I folded my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. "What do you want, Mom?" Her expression faltered. "I wanted to see you. After the party." "You mean after you watched your husband humiliate me and said nothing?" She winced. "Olivia, do you even realize what that did to me?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "You saw me being treated like a child, like I didn't matter, and you smiled, you toasted him." She closed her eyes for a beat. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. A pause. Then, in the quietest voice, he wanted to keep things light. I laughed, bitter and hollow. Well, nothing says light like mocking your stepdaughter in front of a room full of people. I ned. She sat down slowly, like her bones had aged overnight. I didn't know how to stop it. Frank has a way of taking over. You're not a victim, I said, softer now. You chose him, and every day since, you've chosen him over me. Her eyes welled up, and I felt the familiar pull guilt, sympathy, longing for connection. But I didn't move toward her this time. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I know, I said. But you did. Oh. We sat in silence, broken only by the hum of the fridge and the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is for you. I stared at it. What is it? Frank said you might be upset. He thought maybe helping cover a few bills would make things easier. Nah. I felt like I'd been slapped. You're trying to buy me off? No, she said quickly. It's from both of us. Just a gesture. All man. You didn't even ask what I needed. I said, voice low. You assumed I could be fixed with money. She looked down, ashamed. I slid the envelope back across the table. I need a mother who stands up for me. Who doesn't let her husband decide who matters and who doesn't. She blinked back tears, but I didn't let them sway me. She left a few minutes later, lemon squares untouched on the table. After she left, I walked into my bedroom and opened the box where I kept old photo snapshots from when it was just me and her and Dad. Trips to the coast, camping in the backyard, birthdays where we wore matching pajamas. We were a team then. I touched the corner of one photo, arms around each other, laughing and whispered, I miss you. The following week, I threw myself into work. Noah texted a few times short, thoughtful things. Wanna grab coffee? Or, Scout might need more lemon squares. I didn't always reply, but each message felt like a small thread pulling me back to myself. One Thursday afternoon, I agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe near the river. He was already there when I arrived, 2 mugs on the table and a small paper bag between them. Scone? He offered. I smiled. You really do believe baked goods solve everything. They help, he said with a grin. We talked for an hour, maybe more. About high school, about work, about the strange pain of being almost part of a family. He listened, not trying to fix anything, just being there. At one point, I asked, Did you see my mom's post? He nodded. I did. Was I wrong to be hurt? No, he said gently. You were left out on purpose. That kind of erasure? It doesn't happen by accident. I stared into my cup. I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't gone. If I just skipped it. You'd still be you, he said. But now you know who they are. That hit deep. That night, I took the envelope my mother had left and burned it in the kitchen sink. Not out of anger, but because I needed to let it go. The gesture, the insult, the guilt, all of it. And as the flames curled around the paper and turned it to ash, I whispered the 4 words that had started everything. I deserve better than this. The next morning, I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. There was something freeing about setting fire to that envelope. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about reclaiming something that had been quietly taken from me over years of small betrayals. My voice. My space. My worth. I took Scout for a walk down by the Willamette River. The air was crisp, the sky pale with morning fog. Joggers passed by in fleece jackets. A couple walked hand in hand with steaming cups of coffee. Life kept moving, and for once, I didn't feel like I was chasing behind it. As we walked, I thought about the words Noah had said the day before. You'd still be you. But now you know who they are. That truth had sunk in slowly, like rain soaking into dry soil. I had spent years trying to fit into a version of family that never had room for all of me. The more I tried, the more I had to shrink. No more. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not emails. Not copy for clients. But my story. I didn't know if I'd ever share it with anyone, but the words poured out of me like they'd been waiting for permission. I wrote about my daddy's quiet strength, his Sunday pancakes, the way he used to let me stand on his feet when we danced in the kitchen. I wrote about the fracture that came after his death, the silence that grew between my mom and me, and the man who filled it with his ego and empty gestures. I wrote about the birthday dinner. I wrote about the napkin. The act of naming it, of putting it into words, made it real. It gave shape to what I'd felt that night. Not just humiliation, but erasure. I'd been there alive, breathing, present hand, they had treated me like I didn't exist. That night, Noah texted again. Noah. Any interest in live music and mediocre tacos? Me. Only if the band is terrible enough to make me feel talented. Noah. They're called the Slightly Off Keys. I think you'll be very impressed. Death. I met him at a dive bar downtown. The walls were covered in mismatched posters, the lights dimmed to a golden haze, and the band was, as promised, enthusiastically out of tune. We sat in a corner booth, laughing between bites of soggy nachos and watching a drummer who kept losing count. At one point, Noah leaned across the table. You seem lighter tonight. I burned something, I said, sipping my soda. He raised an eyebrow. An envelope. I clarified. With hush money from my mother and Frank. He let out a soft laugh. That's pretty badass. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself, I said, voice quiet. Like I was finally saying, you don't get to define me anymore. He nodded. Good, because they don't. After the music ended and the crowd thinned, we lingered outside the bar, the air cool against our skin. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure. Do you think people can change? Like, really change? He considered that. I think people can choose to be better, but only if they're willing to face who they've been. I nodded slowly. Then I guess it's not on me to make them. No, he said. It never was. Later that week, Carol called. Her voice was warm but heavy with something unsaid. I talked to your mom, she began. She's not doing well. I braced myself. Is she sick? Number just. Shaken. Frank's been colder than usual. Controlling. She said he accused her of dividing the family after she came to see you. I didn't feel sympathy. Not yet. He's angry because she didn't stay silent. Yes. Carol said. And maybe for the first time, she's realizing how much of herself she's lost. There was a long pause. She wants to talk to you. Properly. I exhaled. I don't know if I'm ready. I didn't say you had to. I just thought you should know. That night, I dreamed of the old house, my childhood home, before Frank moved in. I saw the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon rolls in the air. My mother humming to the radio as she stirred batter. And me, little and certain, curled on the counter, feet swinging. I woke up crying. I called her the next day. We met at a small park near her house-neutral territory. She looked older, tired, like sleep hadn't come easy in days. She brought coffee. I brought Scout. We sat on a bench beneath a tree that had just begun to turn gold with the season. I hurt you, she said first, voice hoarse. I see that now. And I let it happen because I thought it was easier than confronting him. I didn't speak. I've been afraid for years, she went on. Afraid of being alone again, afraid of admitting I chose wrong. But that night, seeing your face at that table, I couldn't sleep after. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time in a long time, I saw not just my mother, but a woman who had also lost parts of herself along the way. I don't need you to leave him, I said quietly. I just need you to stop disappearing when I need you most. She nodded, eyes filled with tears. I'm trying, she whispered. But I don't know how to fix this. Start by sitting beside me, I said. Not across from me. She reached out slowly, and I let her take my hand. It wasn't resolution. Not yet. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in years, it felt like maybe, just maybe, there was still a place in this family where I could stand tall and be seen. 2 weeks passed. The leaves turned from gold to amber, and the air carried that faint, nostalgic chill that always reminded me of back-to-school season. I found myself reaching for thicker sweaters and lighting candles in the evenings, craving quiet more than ever. Life wasn't fixed, but it had shifted like a picture slightly askew on the wall, no longer perfect, but honest in its imperfection. One Thursday morning, I received a text from my mother. "Dinner. Just you and me. Sunday night, I'll cook." I stared at it for a long moment. The memory of our park conversation flickered in my mind, her trembling voice, the way she'd squeezed my hand like it was the only solid thing she had left to hold on to. Maybe this was her way of continuing that first step. I replied, "Okay, 6 p.m. Sunday came, and I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to feel grounded. A navy blue sweater, jeans, the small silver pendant my dad gave me when I graduated high school. Scout whined as I reached for my keys, but I kissed his head and promised I'd be back soon. The house was quiet when I arrived. Not eerily so, but expectant. My mother greeted me at the door with a nervous smile and an apron dusted in flour. She smelled like rosemary and warm bread, which hit me with a wave of unexpected comfort. "I made that roast chicken you used to love," she said, brushing her hands on a towel. "And the honey-glazed carrots." "Thanks," I said softly. "It smells amazing." She led me to the dining room, just the two of us this time, no Frank, no long table of watchful eyes. The plates were simple, the wine already poured. She'd even placed a small vase of daisies in the center of the table, our shared favorite. As we ate, the conversation stayed light. She asked about my clients, my apartment, how Scout was doing. I listened, answered, nodded, but there was a thread of something beneath her voice. A tremble. A pause too long. I waited for it. And then, it came. "I need to tell you something," she said, pushing her plate slightly aside. "And it's not easy." I braced myself. "Frank isn't who I thought he was," she continued, eyes lowered. "There have been things I ignored for too long." "Oh." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" "Controlling behaviors. Manipulation. He tracks my spending. Criticizes how I dress. He's charming to everyone else, but at home, it's..." She looked up, tears threatening. "It's like walking on broken glass every day." I felt my breath catch. Part of me had always suspected, but hearing it spoken aloud so plainly still stunned me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked gently. "Because I saw what he did to you," she said. "And I saw what I allowed. And I realized if I didn't stop protecting him, I was going to lose you completely." I swallowed hard. "You nearly did." "I know." Silence wrapped around us like fog, heavy but honest. She continued, "He doesn't know I invited you tonight. He thinks I'm at a friend's. I needed space to talk to someone who sees the truth." "Are you safe?" I asked, voice low. She nodded. "For now. But I'm thinking about leaving. About finding a way out." Emotions surged in my throat. "Whatever you decide, you're not doing it alone." Her lip quivered, and then she reached across the table, grasping my hand with both of hers. "I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking for it." "You're my mother," I said. "That means something, even if it's been buried." She smiled through tears. "It's not buried, just bruised." After dinner, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the stars blink to life one by one. She told me more about the small cruelties, the dismissive comments, the way Frank isolated her over time. It was the story of a slow erosion, not a sudden collapse. And that made it all the more dangerous. "You ever wonder," she asked, "how long it takes before you stop recognizing yourself?" I looked up at the stars, then back at her. "I don't wonder. I know. Because that's what happened to me every time I showed up and felt invisible." We hugged before I left, longer than we had in years. As I drove home, I felt something shift again, not resolved, but real. She was trying. And now, we were on the same side of the door. When I walked into my apartment, Scout jumped into my arms like I'd been gone for days. I sat on the floor with him, heart full, chest aching. The next morning, I had coffee with Noah again. This time, at a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. I told him everything. "She's scared," I said, stirring honey into my drink. "But she's finally facing the truth." Noah leaned back, folding his arms. "That's a big step. One most people never take. She wants to leave him. Do you believe she will?" I paused. "I want to." He nodded. "Then you be the steady thing she can hold on to while she figures it out." I smiled. "You always say the right thing." "Only because I've learned from saying the wrong ones," he said with a smirk. He reached across the table, brushing a crumb from my sleeve. "You look different today." "Different how?" "Lighter. Stronger. Like you're standing in your own frame now, not someone else's picture." That night, I wrote again. More pages. More truth. And for the first time, I didn't write to explain myself, I wrote to witness myself. Every line a thread pulling me closer to the version of me that refused to shrink anymore. And as I typed, I whispered to the empty room. This is the story of how I stopped disappearing. 2 nights after dinner with my mother, I got a call. Not from her, but from Carol. Her voice was tense, clipped. "Olivia, I need you to come to my house. Your mom's here." I sat up on the couch, my heart thudding. "Is she okay?" "She's shaken. But she left him. Tonight." I was in my car within minutes, Scout barking at the sudden movement. The streets blurred under the glow of the streetlights, and I drove faster than I should have. The only thought pounding in my head, she did it. Carol's house was warmly lit. I barely knocked before she opened the door and pulled me into a hug. "She's in the guest room. Go easy." I nodded, stepping into the small room just off the hallway. My mother sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in one of Carol's old Afghans, her face pale but dry. Her suitcase rested by her feet, scuffed, overstuffed, and silent proof that this wasn't another empty promise. When she looked up and saw me, she stood slowly. "I left him," she said softly, as if trying to convince herself. "I know," I said, wrapping her in my arms. She sank into the hug with a weight I hadn't felt since I was a child, the kind of weight you only let go of when you finally admit you've been carrying too much. "I waited until he went to his poker night," she whispered. "I packed what I needed, called Carol from the gas station." "You're safe now," I said, guiding her to sit. "That's what matters." "Dawn." She nodded, her shoulders trembling. "He'll be furious. Let him be. He lost the only good thing he had." We sat for a long time, talking in low voices while Carol brought us chamomile tea. My mother told me about the final straw. Frank finding my note on the refrigerator from our dinner, just a scribbled reminder that she mattered, that I saw her. He'd ripped it up and thrown it in the trash, calling it manipulative sentimentality. "He said I was weak," she said, staring into her tea. "That I always chose pity over pride." I shook my head. "He confused pride with cruelty. You didn't." Later, I tucked her in like she used to do for me. She smiled faintly, already drifting off, and whispered, "You saved me." I whispered back, "No, you saved yourself. I just left the light on." The next morning, I returned home and opened my inbox to a surprise. An invitation to speak on a local podcast about family estrangement and personal storytelling. I'd submitted a written essay to their site weeks ago and forgotten about it. The producer wrote, "Your voice matters. We'd love to hear it out loud." I sat with the email for a long moment. Then, without overthinking, I typed back, "Yes, I'm ready." That night, I met Noah for dinner, this time at a cozy Thai restaurant with sticky wooden tables and Christmas lights strung year-round. He listened intently as I told him about my mom's escape, the podcast invitation, the way my fingers trembled with something that felt suspiciously like joy. "You're starting to build something," he said, stirring his curry. "Not just boundaries, a life." "It's strange," I admitted, "to feel like I can breathe again. Like I'm not always bracing for the next dismissal." "That's healing," he said. "Not forgetting. Just breathing deeper, even with the scars." I'm in nah. When he dropped me off, he walked me to the door, pausing before I stepped inside. "Can I ask you something?" he said, voice low. Of course. Are you still writing? Not just work stuff, your story? I nodded. Every night. He smiled. Good, because someone out there needs it more than they know. The next morning, I sat on my couch, Scout curled beside me, and began outlining what I'd say on the podcast. I didn't want it to be dramatic or sensational. I wanted it to be real. I wanted to tell the truth, not just the pain, but the slow, brave steps that followed it. The parts where we fall apart, and the moments we choose to rebuild. My phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown. Number. You think you've won? You'll regret poisoning her against me. You're nothing but a bitter little girl who can't stand not being the center of attention. My stomach dropped. Frank. I stared at the screen, then calmly blocked the number. I took a deep breath, reminded myself. He doesn't get to live here. Not in my home. Not in my head. I made a folder in my email. Evidence. I filed the message away. Quiet, prepared. Just in case. That evening, I called Carol. He texted me. Her voice sharpened. Threatening? Ugly. But not dangerous. Yet. I'll speak to a friend in legal, she said. Let's make sure you're covered. As I hung up, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. I wasn't scared. Alert, yes. Cautious. But fear no longer ruled me. I'd found my footing. And I wasn't standing alone anymore. That night, I lit a candle, turned on soft music, and sat down to write, not just for the podcast, but for the little girl version of me who once stood at the edge of every family photo, waiting to be seen. This is for you, I whispered. You deserved a seat at the table. And now, I'm building it with my own hands. The day of the podcast taping arrived with an unexpected calm. I woke early, made coffee, and took Scout for a walk along our usual trail. Leaves crunched underfoot, and a slow wind tugged at the fading gold of October trees. Everything around me felt honest, raw, changing, but real. By the time I arrived at the studio, I had rehearsed my story 100 times in my head. Still, stepping into the sound booth made my palms sweat. The producer, Claire, greeted me with a warm smile and a voice like chamomile tea. No pressure, she said, guiding me in. Just a conversation, just your truth. The microphone loomed large in front of me, but when the red light blinked on, something inside me steadied. I spoke. I told them about the dinner, about the children's table, about Frank's smirk and my mother's silence. But more than that, I told them about the long road that had led me there, the slow fading of identity in a home that no longer saw me, the ache of wanting to belong, and the strength it took to walk away. I'm not telling this story for revenge, I said near the end. I'm telling it because someone out there is sitting at a table where they don't belong, swallowing their worth in silence. I want them to know, you don't have to earn a seat. You already deserve one. When I finished, there was a pause on the other end of the glass. Claire stepped in, her eyes misty. That was powerful, she whispered. The episode went live 3 days later. I didn't expect much, maybe a few kind emails or anonymous comments. But by the end of the first week, my inbox overflowed. From Chicago. Thank you for naming the thing I've felt my whole life. I cried in my car listening. From Oregon. I thought I was alone. Your story helped me call my daughter today. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. From New York. I'm planning to leave my husband. You gave me courage. Each message hit like a heartbeat. Everyone a reminder that pain, when spoken aloud, can become a bridge instead of a wall. Even my mother listened. She called that evening, her voice trembling. I heard it, she said. Every word. I didn't know how much I'd forgotten until I heard you say it all out loud. You didn't forget, I said. You looked away, but now you're looking back. There was a long pause. Then, I want to tell my own story someday. Not just the one I lived in. The one I want to live next. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. Then let's write it. Over the next few weeks, the ripple continued. An old professor reached out to invite me to guest speak in her creative nonfiction course. A women's support group asked if I'd consider hosting a workshop on storytelling as healing. And I found myself saying yes, again and again, even when my hands shook with doubt. Meanwhile, Frank's silence was loud. After the blocked text, nothing came. My mother hadn't heard from him either, not since she filed the official separation papers. Carol assured us the lawyer she connected her with was one of the best. Let him vanish, my mother said one night over dinner. Let him disappear into the hole he dug for himself. I toasted to that with a glass of cheap white wine. Noah remained steady through it all. He attended the podcast panel with me, laughed with me at my nervousness before speaking, held my hand afterward when my voice caught. One night, as we sat on my couch watching a documentary about forgotten artists, he turned to me and said, "You're not just surviving anymore, Olivia. You're building." I leaned my head against his shoulder. I never thought I'd get here. You did more than get here. You planted yourself, and now you're growing. That weekend, I found the old family photo albums in a box beneath my bidons I hadn't touched in years. I flipped through pages of birthdays, school dances, road trips. There I was, always on the edge of the frame, smiling, yes, but always just slightly off center. I took out one photo of beach trip from when I was 8 and taped it to my wall. In it, my dad had hoisted me on his shoulders, both of us laughing, the ocean behind us wild and free. It wasn't perfect. The corner was bent, the colors fading. But it was real. And this time, I saw myself clearly. I stood up, went to my desk, and wrote one more line in my journal. My story isn't about being left out, it's about finding where I truly belong. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring. Maybe more podcasts. Maybe a book. Maybe quiet mornings with coffee and Scout. But whatever it was, I'd walk into it with open eyes and an open heart. Because I was no longer waiting for permission. Because I was no longer sitting at the edge of someone else's table. Because I had built my own. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw him. I'd taken the day off work to run errands, hoping for something simple, a grocery list, a walk with Scout, maybe a new plant for my windowsill. I was at the corner market, halfway through the produce aisle, when I heard the voice. It wasn't loud, not angry or commanding like I remembered, but it stopped me cold. "Olivia?" I turned, and there he was. Frank. He wore a navy windbreaker zipped too high, a baseball cap tugged down low. He looked smaller somehow, his posture slightly hunched, the edges of him frayed in a way I hadn't noticed before. For a second, I stood still. Not out of fear but surprise. A strange, hollow stillness filled the space between us. "Didn't expect to see you," he said, offering a half smile I didn't return. Neither did I. He took a step closer, then hesitated. "Your mother filed. The papers came last week." "I know. She didn't even call. After everything I did for her." His voice cracked slightly, but it wasn't sorrow, was disbelief. As if betrayal were something only others could commit. "You mean everything you took from her?" I said evenly. His eyes narrowed. "Is that what she told you? That I'm some kind of monster?" I didn't answer. He didn't deserve defense or debate. He looked around, his voice dropping. "You poisoned her against me, both of you. I gave her stability, a home. And you." "I reclaimed mine," I said. "And so did she. This note." He laughed, dry and bitter. "You think this is justice? You think humiliating your family on some bleeding heart podcast makes you brave?" I stepped closer, my voice steady. But speaking the truth does." A woman passed behind us, pushing a cart full of oranges. Frank shifted uncomfortably, aware of the public eyes, the public space. He always hated being seen for who he really was. He tried again. "Look, I know I made mistakes. But she was weak, Liv. Always running to someone else when things got hard. She stayed with you longer than she should have. That wasn't weakness, it was survival. But she finally chose herself, and I'm proud of her for that." His lips pressed into a tight line. "You'll see, the world doesn't reward loyalty like you think it does. People forget. People move on." I looked him in the eye. "Good. Then you can start forgetting us." "I would." He stared a beat longer, then turned sharply and walked away. basket dangling from his hand like an afterthought. I stood frozen for a second, breath shallow but strong. I didn't cry. I didn't chase. I didn't flinch. I had confronted the man who once made me feel invisible. And I had stood tall. That evening, I called my mom. He tried to make it about what he'd lost, I told her. Not what he destroyed. She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm proud of you," she finally said. "He used to control every room he walked into. The fact that you stood there and told him the truth, that means something. I think it means everything." She paused. "Do you feel safe?" "I do now." The days that followed brought something I hadn't expected. Clarity. The confrontation hadn't reopened old wounds, it had closed them. Not with rage or retaliation, but with finality. I didn't need an apology from Frank. I didn't need understanding. I only needed to see that he no longer had any power over me. Meanwhile, the podcast ripple continued. A local paper published a piece about family estrangement, quoting my episode. A small publisher reached out, curious if I'd considered adapting my story into a memoir. And I started to believe, not just hope, but believe that maybe this story, once a source of pain, had grown roots into something healing for others. On a quiet Sunday, I visited my dad's grave for the first time in over a year. I brought daisies and sat cross-legged beside the stone, my fingers tracing the letters of his name. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. "I finally saw her. The version of Mom you loved, and she's trying. She's really trying," I whispered. I closed my eyes, letting the wind carry my words. "I wish you were here to see this, but maybe, in some way, you are." Oh, when? The sky was clear, the air cool, and the world, at least for that moment, felt stitched back together by something bigger than pain. When I got home, Noah was waiting on the porch with Scout curled at his feet. "Hey," he said, standing. "I brought pie." "You always bring pie," I teased. "Yeah, but this time it's pecan." It felt like a pecan day. We ate on the porch, legs tangled, the setting sun washing everything in gold. I told him about Frank. About the grave visit. About the sense of space finally clearing inside my chest. "You're not carrying him anymore," he said. "No," I smiled. I let him down. "And look at you," he said softly. Still standing. That night, before bed, I looked at the photo on my wall again, the one of my dad holding me by the sea. And I finally noticed something I had never seen before. In the background, my mother stood with her arms crossed, watching us. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't distant either. She was just there, caught mid-frame, mid-thought, mid-life. And somehow, that made the picture complete. For the first time, I understood we were all just trying. Failing. Loving. Fearing. Hoping. But now, I had chosen to rise. And that choice had changed everything. The next morning began with a knock. I was still in my robe, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails when it came, 3 short raps against the door that felt oddly urgent. Scout barked once, then trotted over and sat obediently, tail twitching. I opened the door cautiously, heart tapping a little faster than I liked. It was a courier. "Olivia Bennett?" he asked, confirming with a quick glance at his clipboard. "Yes?" He handed me an envelope. "Certified delivery." From a Frank Winslow. The name made my stomach twist, but I accepted it, nodding silently until the man walked away. For a moment, I simply stared at the thing, cream-colored, thick, with my name written in all capital letters. No return address. No explanation. I took it inside, set it on the counter, and walked away. 20 minutes passed. I folded laundry, watered the plants, fed Scout. I avoided the envelope like it was made of fire. But finally, curiosity outweighed caution. I sliced it open with a butter knife and pulled out a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "Olivia, this isn't an apology, because I know you wouldn't believe it anyway. But I did want to say something before I disappear from your lives completely. I never intended to replace your father. I knew I couldn't. But I resented you for how tightly you clung to his memory. I thought if I could just prove I was better, more stable, more present, Maybe your mother would forget him. Maybe you would too. I realize now that was never love, it was pride. I confused control for commitment. I confused fear for authority. And I lost both of you in the process. Your mother is stronger than I gave her credit for. So are you. You won. And maybe that's justice. Don't worry. You won't hear from me again. Frank. I reread it twice. No apologies, as promised. No warmth. But also no threats. No manipulation. It felt like a door closing. Not slamming, just shutting softly, with the finality of someone who finally realized they were no longer welcome. I put the letter back in its envelope and tucked it into a drawer not to hold onto, but just in case. Life had taught me to keep records, even of endings. Later that afternoon, I visited my mom at her new place. It was a modest apartment across town, just a block from the library and 3 minutes from a quiet little coffee shop we'd started frequenting. The walls were still mostly bare, but she had plants on the windowsill and jazz playing on a small speaker. She looked different. Lighter. Not young exactly, but unburdened. She moved through the space like someone who had remembered what it meant to belong to herself. I bought a desk, she told me, pointing to the corner. Thought I might try journaling. I smiled. You should. Your story deserves space. We shared lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple and perfect. She told me about her new neighbor, a retired nurse named Eleanor who grew roses in recycled paint buckets. I told her about the letter. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. He's done, he knows it. Do you feel safe now? I asked. She looked out the window for a long second. Yes. For the first time in years. That night, I returned home and sat at my desk, staring at a blank page. Not for the podcast, not for work, just for me. And I began writing letters. Not to send, but to release. The first was to Frank. I wrote every word I never got to say out loud, then signed it with a full name I hadn't used since college. Olivia Grace Bennett. Because even in my anger, I wanted to remind myself of who I was. The second was to my dad. Dear Dad. She's okay now. You can rest easy. I folded it carefully and slid it into a shoebox I labeled, unsent. By the end of the week, the box held 7 letters. Some long, some short. Some angry, some aching. But each one left me a little more free. On Friday, I returned to the support group at the community center. I hadn't planned to go back after the podcast, but something in me needed to sit in that circle again. The group leader, Marla, welcomed me with a smile and a gentle pat on the shoulder. We spoke about thresholds, those quiet, internal lines we cross when we're ready to stop surviving and start living. I listened to a woman named Tina describe standing up to her father for the first time. Another woman, Ava, read a poem she wrote about silence. I felt both seen and invisible in the best way possible, like I didn't have to explain myself. When it was my turn, I spoke without planning. There's power in the things we never say. I told them. But there's more power in the things we finally do. Afterward, Tina hugged me. I heard your episode. You said the thing I never knew how to say. Driving home, the night sky hung low and vast. I rolled the windows down and let the autumn air tangle my hair. Scout slept in the passenger seat, snoring softly. And I realized I was no longer grieving the family I lost. I was learning how to build the one I needed. The next morning, I took a stack of my unsent letters and tossed them, one by one, into the fire pit on my balcony. They curled into ash quietly, without protest. I watched until the last flicker disappeared. Some stories, I decided, were meant to be told. And others? Others were meant to be released. The invitation came in the form of a handwritten card, tucked inside a pale yellow envelope with a sprig of lavender pressed into the corner. It was from my mother. Dinner, just us. No reason but joy. Mom. It arrived on a Tuesday, and for the rest of the week, I kept glancing at it like it might vanish. The handwriting was familiar, steady, but with a slight curve at the ends, like she'd finally allowed herself a bit of flair. Friday evening came with a soft drizzle and the smell of rain on the concrete. I arrived at her apartment with a bottle of red wine and a tin of chocolate biscotti. She greeted me in a pale blue cardigan and jeans, barefoot, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. Her hair was pinned up in the way I remembered from childhood, casual, unfussy, like she had better things to do than fuss with strands. "Come in," she smiled, stepping aside. "You look good." "You too," I said, and meant it. The apartment smelled of garlic and rosemary. A pot simmered on the stove, steam rising like a promise. The small table in her kitchen nook was set with linen napkins and two mismatched candlesticks. "I wanted to make something from scratch," she said, leading me into the kitchen. "Not because it's a special occasion, but because I wanted it to be." I leaned against the counter, watching her stir the sauce. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken marsala. And a salad with that pear vinaigrette you like." "Since when do you remember that?" She looked over her shoulder, one eyebrow raised. "Since I started listening better." The food was delicious, rich, warm, and grounding. But more than that, the conversation flowed in a way it never had before. We talked about books we were reading, people we missed, dreams we'd buried and were now unearthing. "I applied for a part-time position at the library," she said between bites. "Children's section. Just shelving books and doing story hour. They called today. I start next week." "That's amazing," I beamed. "You're going to be perfect." "I think so," she said softly. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm returning to myself." We sat with that for a while. No rush, no need to fill the silence, just the clink of forks and the soft hum of Nina Simone playing in the background. After dinner, she brought out a small cake, a simple vanilla one with cream cheese frosting and a single candle in the center. "What's this for?" I asked, laughing. "For starting over," she said. "We never celebrated that." She lit the candle. "Make a wish." I thought for a second, then blew it out. She leaned back in her chair, watching me. "You know, I used to think I had to choose. Between you and him. Between keeping peace and keeping you close. I thought I was protecting something." "No. You were," I said gently. "But it wasn't us." She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I'm sorry it took me so long." "I'm just glad you got here." The next morning, I woke up early and found myself writing again. This time, the story came without struggle. It began with a table small, wooden, slightly chipped on one corner. Two women sitting across from each other, no longer mother and daughter by default, but by choice. A few days later, I was asked to speak at a local women's empowerment luncheon. The theme was redefining home. I knew instantly what I wanted to say. On the day of the event, I stood before a room of mostly women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Some had graying hair, some wore bright lipstick, some carried an air of stillness like they'd weathered storms too numerous to name. I spoke to them not as a teacher or survivor but as one of them. A woman who had once been a girl at the wrong table. "I used to think home was a place that had to accept me," I said, my voice steady. "But now I know home is what I build for myself. The people I let in, the spaces I create, the truths I tell out loud." There was silence at first. Then a standing ovation. Afterward, a woman in her 60s approached me, eyes wet but bright. "My daughter stopped speaking to me 5 years ago," she said. "I didn't understand why until today. I think I do now. And I'm going to call her. Just to listen." I did. I hugged her. Not because I had answers, but because we both finally understood the question. Later that evening, Noah met me for dinner. We sat outside under strings of warm white lights, our breath visible in the cool air. I told him about the luncheon, about the woman, about the candle on the cake. He reached across the table and took my hand. "You didn't just reclaim your story, Liv. You gave it legs. You let it walk out into the world." "I think it was always trying," I said. "I just kept locking the door." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no edge, no fear, just presence. That night, before bed, I wrote another letter. This one I didn't tuck into a drawer or set aflame. I left it open on my desk. It began. To the girl who thought she had to stay small to be safe. "You don't Not anymore. Love, Olivia. And in that moment, I knew. Some stories are not just meant to be told. They're meant to be lived. Thanksgiving arrived with the first snow of the season, soft flurries settling like whispers on rooftops and sidewalks. The air held that crisp anticipation, as if the world was pausing for something sacred. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the holiday. In fact, I was hosting it. I spent the morning in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, apron dusted with flour, and scout weaving between my feet like a sous chef with a tail. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and roasted vegetables. The playlist was a mix of soul classics and gentle acoustic guitar. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I was creating comfort. My mother arrived first, carrying a homemade pecan pie and a small bouquet of eucalyptus and sunflowers. She wore a scarf the same golden shade as the mums blooming in the hallway planter. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her smile was warm and steady. "Smells like real love in here," she said, handing me the pie. "That's exactly what it is," I replied. Carol came next, arms full of sparkling water, cranberry relish, and a stack of Tupperware already labeled. "You know I don't trust anybody else's fridge," she joked, placing everything neatly on the counter. "This is so you, Olivia. Cozy. Safe." Then came Noah, carrying a fresh baguette and a bottle of wine, his laugh the kind that made everyone else laugh, too. He kissed my forehead, then knelt to greet Scout, who barked in delighted recognition. By 3 o'clock, we were all seated at the table when I had thrifted and refinished myself. It wasn't grand, but it was strong and wide enough for laughter, for elbows, for stories. As we passed the dishes around, I looked at the people around me. My mother, rediscovering joy. Carol, the sister I found in struggle. Noah, steady and patient. And Menot on the sidelines, not waiting for permission but at the center of something I had created. At some point, the conversation turned to traditions. "What did you used to do for Thanksgiving as a kid?" Carol asked, scooping mashed sweet potatoes onto her plate. I hesitated, the past brushing against my shoulder. "We used to go to my aunt's house. Big table. Loud. A little chaotic. After my dad passed, it got quieter. Then, complicated." My mother looked up, her eyes tender. "We forgot how to celebrate for a while," she said. "We forgot how to be together." "But you remembered," I said, squeezing her hand. Carol nodded. "You both did. That's what matters." After dessert, we sat around with coffee and thick wool socks, wrapped in blankets, talking about books and the way the seasons make us feel. I told them about the memoir idea, and Carol nearly knocked over her mug with excitement. "You have to write it," she insisted. "Your voice, it's needed." "I've started pieces," I admitted. "But I'm scared." Noah, sitting beside me, placed a hand gently on my back. "That means you're doing it right." Later, after everyone had left and the dishes were done, I sat on the couch with Scout asleep at my feet. The apartment hummed with silence and not empty, but full. Full of breath, of memory, of something whole. I reached for my journal and opened to a blank page. Thanksgiving notes. This year, I chose the guest list. This year, nobody made me feel like I didn't belong. This year, love looked like sweet potatoes, like gentle jokes, like eyes that saw all of me. This year, I didn't shrink. I served. I spoke. I stayed. That weekend, I took a long walk through the neighborhood. The snow had melted slightly, leaving patches of wet leaves clinging to the pavement. A few houses had already put up lights. Something about it, the quiet hopefulness, made me pause. As I passed a bookstore, the sign in the window caught my eye. "Your story belongs here." I walked in. The shop was warm, smelling of old pages and fresh espresso. I wandered until I found the journal section, running my fingers along the spines of leather-bound books until one caught my attention. Forest green, soft cover, no lines. A blank space for a new beginning. At the register, the cashier, a middle-aged woman with silver curls and an easy smile, looked at the journal, then at me. "First time writing?" she asked. "No," I said. "But first time writing like this." She nodded. Well, welcome back. When I got home, I opened the journal and began outlining the memoir. Not just the podcast episodes, but the untold pieces, the quiet moments, the letters I never sent, the nights I cried in the bathtub and the mornings I still got up. I gave space to everything: the anger, the love, the complexity. I didn't need to edit myself anymore. That evening, I got a text from Ava, one of the women from the support group. Ava. Starting a reading circle for women who want to tell their stories. You in? I replied without hesitation. Me. Always. And just like that, the next part of the story began. Not with a bang, not with a grand twist, but with an invitation. A new table. One I was choosing to sit at, not because I was finally allowed, but because I had made room for myself. The kind of room that holds grief and joy in equal measure. The kind of room that says, you are enough, just as you are. The kind of room I had been building all along. The reading circle met on the first Thursday of each month at a quiet cafe tucked between a used vinyl shop and a dry cleaner with a perpetually flickering open sign. The back room had been converted into a cozy nest of mismatched chairs, oversized pillows, and a single round table that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh ink. Our first meeting was small, just 6 women. Ava, who started it, sat at the head of the circle like a gentle conductor, guiding us not with authority, but presence. Each of us brought a piece to share. Some read poems, others stories half-finished or scribbled in the margins of spiral notebooks. And when it was my turn, I didn't read from the podcast script or the outlines for my memoir. I read from a new piece. One I'd written the night before, heart racing, hand shaking. It began like this. When you grow up at the kids' table, it takes a long time to realize you were never supposed to stay there. The silence that followed was thick, not with discomfort, but recognition. Carol, who'd come with me, reached over and squeezed my knee. Across the circle, Ava smiled. After the session, a woman named Darlene approached me. She was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of voice that sounded like it had held too many secrets. I've never told anyone about my stepfather, she said softly. But your story, it unlocked something. We stood there in the soft hum of the cafe lights, and I realized again. Every time we tell the truth, we make room for someone else's. The following week, I received an email from a small independent publisher. Subject: a voice we believe in. They'd heard the podcast, read the blog entries I'd started posting, and were interested in seeing a proposal for a book. My heart pounded as I read and reread the email, blinking back tears. It wasn't a huge advance. It wasn't a New York Times deal, but it was real. It was someone saying, "We see you, we believe in this." I called my mom first. "You remember when you said I should write it all down?" I said. She laughed, voice thick with emotion. "I also told you to buy stock in IBM back in '99, but this I got right." Carol insisted we celebrate. She brought over a bottle of champagne and 3 paper crowns. We toasted in my living room, Scout snoozing between our feet, and danced to Whitney Houston until we were breathless. As I worked on the manuscript, I found myself not just recalling events but re-experiencing them through a softer lens. The podcast had been the raw wound. The book became the scar tender, yes, but no longer bleeding. I included everything. The birthday dinner, the kids' table, the cruel smirk from Frank. The silence of my mother. The slow rebuilding. The courage it took to say no. The harder courage it took to say yes to love, to truth, to myself. When I turned in the final draft, the editor replied with a simple message. "This is going to matter." Weeks passed. Then months. Winter turned to spring. The cherry blossoms bloomed along the park near my apartment, and I walked Scout every morning under a canopy of pink and white, feeling the kind of peace I once thought unreachable. And then, on a Friday afternoon, a package arrived. Inside was the first printed copy of my book, The Kids' Table, A Story of Belonging by Olivia Grace Bennett. I held it in my hands like something sacred. Not because it was perfect, but because it was proof. Proof that even the smallest voice can echo. Proof that healing isn't always loud, it's often quiet, steady, earned. I brought the book to my mother that evening. She turned it over in her hands like she was holding a photo of someone she used to know and was only now seeing clearly. "I hope I'm in it," she teased, though her eyes brimmed. "You're everywhere in it." She looked at me, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm proud of you." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. For a long time, we sat in silence, the kind that feels full, not empty. Later, I placed the book on my shelf right next to a framed photo of my father holding me at the beach, and a small ceramic mug that read, "Make your own table." That night, I received a message from a reader in Kentucky. She'd found my blog by accident and binged every podcast episode in a single weekend. "I thought I was the only one," she wrote. "Thank you for showing me I'm not." And with that, I knew this story was never just mine. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told to stay small. Every daughter who had to become her own protector. Every voice that cracked the first time it spoke the truth aloud and then spoke again, stronger. My life didn't become a fairy tale, but it became something real. A steady, honest rhythm. A room filled with people who stayed. A table I built with my own hands. And for the first time, I didn't have to ask if I belonged. I knew. I always had.